Okay, welcome everybody to the last Tile Network seminar in 2024. Today we have Dr. Matt Offord with us, and he is a senior lecturer in experiential leadership education at the Adam Smith Business School at the University of Glasgow. I was prepared to give him an introduction, but he asked me that he would like to introduce himself and has prepared something to that end. So without further ado, I hand over to Matt.
Thank you very much, Carolina. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that okay? Excellent. Okay. So poor performance, data breaches, lack of loss of intellectual property, climate change, climate damage, and bullshit. These are all persistent problems that are dogging the use of large language models such as ChatGPT 3 and 4. Despite these persistent problems and the fact that GPT 3 and 4 have not really come anywhere close to expectations, there's still been an enormous amount of hand-wringing about the impact of generative AI on higher education, specifically around assessment. So what I'm going to do today is talk you through some of the ways that that large language models work. We'll talk about and reframe them, the history of AI in this context, and what that impact is on assessment. And my argument here really is that assessment is not the problem when it comes to AI. Actually, assessment is the problem when it comes to assessment. And we all basically are living in an increasingly artificial society, and we need to do something about that rather than the technology itself. So my name is Matt. I just wanted to introduce myself because I just wanted to make some points about my interest in AI, because as Carolina said, I'm a leadership scholar. So why would I be interested in AI? Well, I'm a second career academic. I've only been in academia for 5 years now. Prior to that, I ran my own business dealing with data and leadership as a consultancy. And prior to that, I was a submarine navigator, which was involving a lot of maths and stats. And for a long time, I was a mine clearance diver, which is sort of the best way I can describe that is I was an underwater bomb disposal officer. And that world increasingly become more technological and much more about probability and statistics. But before that, before I joined the Navy, and I was in the Navy for 30 years, I was a really keen enthusiast on computer science and AI. And I started coding when I was 14, and that's actually 1984. I started coding in BASIC, and I used to go to computer fairs because computers were so rare in the 80s that you could actually go to a fair and see computers on top of a desk and things like that. We call that an office today, but at the time it was actually something to go out of the house and go and see. And I've been following AI and computer science since that time. So, and obviously we've had computers for a very long time now. So what I would like to do in this talk is give you a short history of data and AI as a way of reframing this kind of narrative that large language models have just kind of burst onto the scene. I'm going to refute that. And I'm going to talk instead about the tech hype cycle and about the constant AI winters and summers that we've had through the development of AI, and how, we don't just have a breakthrough and then it just keeps getting better and better. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that AI poses to society, and that's all kind of building context. But obviously, I'm going to go on to higher education, and I'm going to talk about assessment, but I'm going to suggest that assessment with regard to AI is not the key problem. And I'm going to suggest instead that perhaps that we have got into a bit of a rut when it comes to assessment. Now, this is not intended to upset or offend anybody. I'm thinking that we all do a very good professional job, but I think that the way that assessment has evolved is actually causing problems now in our increasingly artificial society. And then I'm going to give a case study of how I'm basically just at the start of my journey to learn how to provide more authentic assessment and give some principles for assessment in an increasingly artificial world. I wanted to put these lyrics as well from a Radiohead tune that was released in the 1990s. It's quite a famous one if you're old enough to remember it, called Karma Police. And I think that this perfectly describes large language models, because you have this line, "He talks in maths," which points out that actually large language models do not speak to you in your own language. They actually convert your language into mathematical tokens, and this is just a statistical operation. The buzzing like a fridge, I think, is a good explanation of tech hype. There's a lot of buzz around AI, and if you put in prompts to ChatGPT, the responses you get are a little bit detuned, so a little bit like a detuned radio. So that's why I put those lyrics from Radiohead in there. Sorry, my computer's just frozen briefly, and now we go. Sorry. So my computer froze, so I just clicked and clicked and clicked. Sorry about that. I just want to start with this quote from Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky was involved very much in the AI venture. We'll be talking a little bit more about the history of AI in a minute. And as you can see, he's not a fan of large language models. He points out that ChatGPT has a tendency to produce both the truth and also falsehoods. And basically, it doesn't have any real, constraint, is the way Noam Chomsky describes it. And we'll find out a little bit more in this talk about why it doesn't have that constraint, because it doesn't have any sense of context. And that is really, really important. So just a very brief history of AI then and big data. So you may not be aware of this, but big data has been with us since 1890. That's 135 years of big data. If we define big data as a data set that's so large that our normal methods of dealing with the data are insufficient, we have to find another way of doing it. Then that first happened in the census in the United States in 1890. There's a lot more about this in a great book called Big Data and Education by Ben Williamson. Really strongly recommend that book. It's a great one. But that kind of led to the invention of the first modern computer, which was the automatic tabulating machine, invented by Herman Hollerith, which was the first computer that was used to store data. So computers are initially used to store data. I'm sort of deliberately excluding Babbage's analytical engine here, which was more of a kind of a maths solution kind of engine. But this is the first computer that's used to store data. And this is the beginning of computers. IBM was founded by Herman Hollerith in 1924. And by the 50s and 60s, we start the third industrial revolution, which is really the advent of computer technology. Around that time, Alan Turing famously asked in a paper in 1951, "Can computers think?" And by 1956, the Dartmouth Conference that was attended by the likes of Claude Shannon, Herbert Simon, information complexity theory people, also John McCarthy, the mathematician, and this term artificial intelligence was used. By this time, this question has changed, and the question is, can computers fool people into thinking that they are human or human-like? And this is where this term artificial intelligence comes from. So artificial intelligence is used to kind of like fool people into thinking that computers can provide human-like responses. It's a different kind of way to look at the Turing test, if you like. But when these mathematicians start to use the idea of applying human thought patterns or solutions to problems, but with computational power, they get incredible results straight away. And this is typically known as the golden age of AI. The golden age of AI is not 2024. or 2023, which is the breakthrough of ChatGPT 3. It's actually 1956 to 1974. But what happens then at that point is that AI researchers hit a complexity barrier. And I'll be talking a lot more about this complexity barrier and why that's important. But I'll just say for now that computers have physical constraints in terms of the amount of complexity they can handle. So what happens is that AI research goes into a winter period. This is known as an AI winter, and we see consecutive AI winters and summers up until 2020, when ChatGPT 3 was launched 3 years before its breakthrough. That's the beginning of an AI summer, but there's no reason to think that we won't go back into an AI winter in due course, because that's the way it's always been with AI technology. There's no reason to think that that's going to change. Now, I'm aware that I'm preaching to the converted here with this particular slide, so I might not spend too much time on this, but in terms of complexity, if AI is attempting to replicate human thinking or the human brain, it might be worth noting or sort of referring to the fact that the C. elegans worm, which has a connectome of 7,000 connections, took decades and decades for scientists to map that connectome. And AI is obviously trying to emulate the human brain, which has 100 trillion connections. So this is like an order of magnitude, or several orders of magnitude, obviously, more than C. elegans worm, which took a similar amount of time to map as it's taken to develop AI. So what are the chances that AI is going to approach human-like intelligence at any point in our lifetimes? And that's because, as I said before, computers have real limitations when it comes to complexity. Information processing, the storing of memories, the storing of files, is incredibly energy intensive. And that's why in computer science, early computer science in the 50s and 60s, computers were basically always catching fire, a term that was called halt and catch fire. So the ability of computers to manage heat is very limited. If you're watching a video or something on your laptop, you'll very quickly hear the fan kick in as that computer attempts to deal with a huge amount of heat waste. And this means that basically, as soon as something like a new technology like AI starts to make progress with complex problems, they then give it more complex problems. It has to work harder, and the heat waste and the energy consumption then becomes a physical barrier. And we have to wait. We go into an AI winter at that point while we wait for the technology to catch up, and then we can move on to more complex problems. And that's why we're long past the golden age of AI, and we've had these series of successive winters and summers. So in terms of the types of AI and the expected progress of AI, it's worth noting that all the AIs that we have at the moment are narrow, or sometimes they're called weak AI. They are very task specific, so they're very good at doing a single task. Human-like intelligence, I probably don't need to say too much about this, but human-like intelligence is a general intelligence. We can use it for different tasks. And this is AGI, artificial general intelligence, is where artificial intelligence scientists are kind of doing their research and working towards. And then there's also an aspiration for super artificial intelligence, which goes beyond human intelligence. At the moment, we do not have AGI or ASI. We only have weak AI. So large language models and deep mind are narrow models. And even these, even though they have limited memory, they require enormous amounts of energy. And we'll come on to that in a minute. So as a result of this, and as a result of the hype around AI, there are several unfounded things that we keep hearing, or I keep hearing anyway. One of them is that large language models can think critically. I actually heard this from a professor of economics in a meeting, and I really don't like to contradict a professor, but unfortunately that's not correct. Large language models can't think critically, and actually you can ask ChatGPT 4 if it can think critically, and it will tell you that it cannot. Large language models have a very high level of intelligence. I've heard somewhere that they have a semantic IQ of 150. That's not true. They don't have anything approaching human intelligence or general intelligence. The idea that AI is here to stay and that it's a fundamental part of the future workplace, I mean, it's probably true, but it's not definitely true. Just like saying, you know, the internet is here to stay. Well, you know, we don't really know that for sure. And another one is that if this is AI now, it can only get better. And I'm going to show you some evidence today of how it might not get better, how it could actually get worse. So in my world, business world, we're quite interested in, you know, the kind of ventures that have failed, you know, where entrepreneurs have piled money into it and why it hasn't happened. And generally speaking, Gartner, which is a technology consultancy, Goldman Sachs, which is obviously investment, and Deloitte and McKinsey, they're all basically reporting that this is just not taking off. Goldman Sachs very famously this year said that they'd invested $1 trillion into AI and had not got a penny back, and are asking when the bubble is going to burst. Other consultancies like Gartner, Deloitte, etc., they're kind of blaming the humans, really. They're saying, well, people are not adopting AI quick enough, and that's why there's a problem. But actually, they're kind of overlooking the problems like loss of company intellectual property. People are just putting company stuff into AI platforms, and then it's going into the internet. Data breaches, same sort of reasons, and the fact that it just doesn't perform very well and hasn't delivered. And actually, this is all quite predictable because Roy Amara, who was a computer scientist in the 1960s, came up with the law that new technology will be overestimated in the short term and then underestimated in the long term. Actually, you know, this goes for the iron hoe at the advent of the Iron Age. It goes for any technology. Any new technology tends to be overhyped at the beginning. So we have the Gartner hype cycle, which is a good kind of demonstration of this. We have a technology trigger, say the ChatGPT 3 breakthrough in 2023. We then get this huge gold rush. Investors are piling money into it. There's mass media kind of support for it, and there's all these huge inflated expectations. Again, in my business world, we're seeing a proliferation of startups that are just built on AI. And then after a while, Gartner are now saying in 2024 that we're just slightly beyond that peak of inflated expectations, because this is the point where we start to get some negative press, some negative kind of media coming in. And we're seeing that a lot, especially around about the damage that it's doing to the climate, for example. And then we start to see the kind of abandonment of this particular technology. And Gartner, again, have predicted that by 2028, 80% of the large language models, the actual individual models that have been developed in-house by different companies, will be abandoned by 2028 due to costs and due to lack of performance. So then we go into the very miserably named trough of disillusionment. And at that point, we're all a bit fed up with it. We've had too much of it. And that's the kind of low point. But after a while, we'll start to think about that technology and about using it perhaps more sensibly without the hype, and looking at what it can do. And then we move up to the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity. So where we are at the moment with large language models is we're just on the edge of the peak of inflated expectations. So we can start to see the popularity of large language models perhaps declining. A recent paper, I used that word bullshit very advisedly at the beginning. I mean, a bit like the authors of this paper, Hicks et al., they probably use that term to get people's attention, but they actually do give a scientific reasoning for the use of this word. And I'm going to go into the next slide. I'm going to explain what they mean by this. But just as a kind of funny aside, when I was looking at this on Microsoft Edge a few months ago, I don't use that browser anymore. And I had this paper up on the browser, and it asked me if I wanted to ask Copilot about this particular paper, which I thought was quite funny. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is kind of rip the top off of this so-called black box and the idea that AI is some kind of mysterious technology that we can't understand, and it's just too complicated for us, and therefore we just put information in and we trust that the information that comes out is actually useful. Actually, large language models are not really that difficult to understand. So large language models have a huge data set, which is the entire internet. They turn all of the words and content in the internet into what are called semantic tokens. Semantic tokens are kind of words, fragments of words, prefixes, suffixes, and so on. But basically, they're word fragments that can make up words and then sentences. It then labels all these data and quantifies them. And that's why when I said it speaks in maths, it literally does speak in maths. So if we have a Gaussian curve of all of these different word fragments or semantic tokens, and that's our model, that's our statistical model. When you put in a prompt, it will try to match the semantic tokens in your prompt to one single semantic token, which is the most probable or plausible, or if you like, popular semantic token in its data set, which matches your semantic token. It will then try to match another token to that one, and so on and so forth, until it creates sentences and paragraphs and so on. In other words, what it's trying to do is to create a plausible response to your prompt, not a truthful one or an accurate one or a reliable one. It is trying to provide you with a human-like response. And its analog for the truth in this case is simply what are the most popular semantic tokens on the internet. So, I mean, I probably don't need to tell you that the internet is not the most reliable source of data. And particularly interesting for us as academics is that we're probably interested not in the most popular phrases and terms that would be on the internet, but perhaps that scarcer data in the tails of that distribution. What Shumailov et al. Have discovered is that with each generation of a large language model, as it proceeds through the generations, so those tails of scarcer data are being removed. So we're getting a distribution which is becoming taller and thinner. And they predict that this could lead to model collapse in the end, which is the degeneration of an AI generated model. What I always think of when I read that paper is kind of AI, artificial dementia. You know, these models becoming more and more, degenerated and inaccurate over time. And that's because of this issue of them using more, more prevalent data. There's also the problem with data poisoning in the internet, people that are putting deliberately false information on the internet. And also Gartner have predicted that the data will run out at some point between 2026 and 2028. So just to show you kind of how this works, I'm going to use these two vectors from Bridgelal 2024. What the model actually does is when you put in a prompt, let's say about your dog, it might come up with a semantic token to start that sentence of the, but it actually runs two vectors. It runs these two vectors. It builds out a response based on two different probabilities, and then it chooses which one it's going to deliver to you as an answer. And if you look at this particular sentence, the dog sat on my couch because it was, when it's coming to choose the last semantic token in that sentence, if the model is preferencing the word couch, it might say soft, and if it's using the word dog, it might say tired. So these two sentences are equally plausible responses to that original prompt, but as you can see, they have very different kinds of meanings. And this is where we start to see hallucination, often called hallucination in large language models. And what Higgs et al. State is that this is not a hallucination, because AI itself has no idea what reality is. It can't hallucinate because it doesn't know what reality is. And similarly, it can't lie because it doesn't know what the truth is. But what it can do is bullshit us into thinking that this is a plausible human-like response. So that's why they choose that word very deliberately. And I'm sure it has nothing to do with their citations and things like that. So what does all this mean? Gartner are predicting that we're going to see much more modest large language models in the future, more smaller, kind of smaller domain-specific models, and using synthetic data, in other words, moving into the world of simulation rather than prediction, because prediction based on a really messy data set like the internet is very problematic. And there simply will have to be improvements in energy consumption and memory consolidation in order for AI to move forward. So, and that I think is an interesting, it's a really big challenge for AI, honestly. I'm actually doing some research at the moment looking at a small domain specific model, which is working on a business simulation game. So it's working on simulated data. And we're looking at that to see whether that AI performs any better than it does just on a big internet data set. We don't know the answer to that question just yet. But I mentioned memory consolidation and energy. So I just wanted to also point out that we're also seeing increasing amount of media reports about the impact that ChatGPT is having on our environment. This paper by de Vries is actually, by de Vries' own admission, just kind of a bit of guesswork, but they looked at AI-powered searches on the internet, and de Vries thinks that there are 10 times more consuming more energy than a traditional Google search. Now, this, I have heard actually that it might be more like 30 times. The problem is that OpenAI is not very open, so we don't know how many data servers they have and how much energy they're consuming. They haven't challenged this, this point about 10 times more energy, so my guess is it's probably more than that. Otherwise, they would have challenged it if they had the ability to do so. So AI is predicted to consume more energy than Argentina by 2027, and training one single large language model is going to it consumes more energy than 5 cars over their entire lifetime. So this is a really big problem. When you combine this with the fact that cloud computing consumes more energy than the entire global airline industry, we're actually creating a lot of carbon dioxide in our digital spaces without even having to get on an aircraft. So that was a very quick run through all of the kind of, it's a deliberately provocative and skeptical view of artificial intelligence. And I feel like I have to do that because there's so much hype around large language models that I feel that there should be a voice that's saying, maybe it's not all so great. So obviously you don't have to kind of believe what I'm saying or go along with what I'm saying. It's very much up to you, but I wanted to provide this alternative perspective. And I want to bring that to higher education. So there's quite a lot of talk about assessment, but this Oxford University Press paper suggests that the actual impact on higher education is more or less the same as it is in businesses. It's the problem with data breaches, it's the problem with intellectual property, performance, and also the fact that, as they report, researchers are adopting AI without really understanding it. And my question would be, is this educators too? And I guess it probably is, because educators and researchers are often the same people. So what are the risks associated with AI? One of the problems is, so we have access to Copilot through our data sharing agreement with Microsoft. And if you go on the Copilot panel, it has a little green shield at the top, which says that your data is safe. So that's kind of like the safest place that you can use AI, within our own firewall and within our own data sharing agreements. But if you use an AI plagiarism detector that you just found on the internet, that could be a big problem, because A, they don't work, and B, if you load a student's exam or essay into that detector, you are now sharing that student's intellectual property with the whole world. And that's a problem, and that's actually happened. I know that that's happened at the University of Glasgow. So there is a problem that we just don't know what data OpenAI is using. Again, they're very, very not open about the whole thing. And my advice would be to really check the small print. If you're using AI outside of that Microsoft universe, and lots of people will be developing their own AI models, but check with university guidance and check with the legal team as well. They're really, really good, and they're very much on top of all of this, and they'll give good advice about that. So let's talk about assessment then. So I'm going to suggest, well, I'm going to ask you actually, does AI, in your view, differ from other search tools? So really, I suppose the question I'm asking is, sorry, beg your pardon, if there's a bullet suddenly dropped off the bottom, but I think the question that we could ask ourselves is, if we lived in a universe where AI did not exist, it had not been invented, would we still have a problem with academic dishonesty? And I think the answer to that is fairly obviously yes. When I mark essays, I get quite often what I call, not quite often, sometimes, a few times, something I call a Google mosaic, where they've just basically searched for an answer and then they've just smashed together a load of stuff that they've found on the internet. You could argue that this is getting worse because, you know, at what point can students, how capable are students of telling what is real and in a world of fakes, or how good are we at telling what's real in a world of fakes? One way that we can use this is to use AI to combat AI, and lots of people are doing this, using AI models, prompts, prompt engineering, and so on, to educate ourselves and to educate students as to how to, you know, deploy critical thinking skills with the responses of AI. So I think that, you know, that's a possible strategy that could be used. I don't use that strategy myself because I just don't really use AI, to be honest. But I think there is a bigger problem, and that is with assessment in higher education. And I personally feel like a lot of our assessment is becoming outdated because it's basically asking students how good are they at data retrieval. And my argument would be that this isn't really a human domain anymore. We have machines that can do that for us. So why are we sort of testing that sort of thing? Oh, and there's my question. You know, if we do remove AI, does this problem go away? So the way that I've been trying to tackle this is, rather than using AI itself, which I absolutely, you know, I completely accept that is a strategy you can use. I'm not criticizing that, but I've kind of I've gone in a different direction. I've gone outside, effectively. I've gone outdoors to try and give students real kind of authentic experiences that they can draw on. John Dewey spoke about in 1904 about the widening and deepening of conscious life. He kind of argued that people are sort of sleepwalking through their lives, really, without noticing what's going on. And the idea of reflective inquiry is to know how one knows. And that's really useful as well, I think, for students, particularly around that transition from school to higher education, where we're asking them about critical evaluation, and they're asking us, you know, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Because we haven't really explained it. But it's actually teaching our students how to learn for themselves and to understand their own cognitive processes. Inquiring into our own teaching, with a little bit more deliberation. This is something that I've been trying to do. I'm just at the beginning of this. Exploring the meaning of what it means to be a reflective inquirer, and taking that stance, because I've noticed among my colleagues, I'm trying to employ a more reflective approach to my teaching. And I think a lot of my colleagues are quite surprised by that, because coming from a PhD where I've been a distant observer of things that I'm researching, this is kind of a bit of a change. So I think, you know, that's an important thing, but it does ground you in the actual kind of world. And I think, you know, to come back to AI, what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do as a leadership scholar is to prepare students for when they go into the world of work and they become leaders. And my argument is that leaders show the way. And in order to show the way, they have to know the way. So they need knowledge. But when we talk about leadership, no one talks about the actual creation of knowledge, which is initially from data. So data becomes contextualized and then becomes information. We then evaluate that contextualized information and turn that into knowledge. I'm a pragmatist, so for me, knowledge is for action. So you have this kind of process that goes from noticing to picking up on a certain thing, observing it, reflecting on it, evaluating it, turning that into knowledge, and then acting on that knowledge. And I believe that the realm of computation, which includes AI and other tools, is really just in that noticing, observing part of it. AI can't reflect, computers can't reflect or evaluate in terms of turning information into knowledge. So I want to give my students experiences that allow them to move all the way through that spectrum. And one way that I've been doing that is by giving them kind of what I call campus field trips. And this is, I basically send them out. In this particular case, this was reported in the Sunday Herald. We had a journalist come and watch us do this and then write it up for the paper. But basically, I sent my students out onto the Buyers Road. I got them to observe data in the real world. So looking at data in the subway station, in the coffee shop, you know, all around. And then they do hand-drawn visualizations on a postcard of those data. And that's based on a book called Dear Data by Lupi and Posavec in 2016, where the two authors send postcards to each other with visualizations of data they encounter during their week. So I get them to do that, come back into the classroom, then we discuss that data, what impact that data has on people's lives, whether it's equal or unequal, fair or unfair, and so on. And then I get them to write a journal about that. When we come to assess it, we ask them to draw on their evidence from their journal. So not searchable evidence or data, but actual evidence of data from their own experiences. And we try to make that creative and collaborative, and we get them to discuss how they feel about it, which are all things which are obviously very human and not easy to replicate via AI. And overall, you know, I go back to that sort of diagram that I had on the previous slide. We're trying to help them to learn how to think rather than what to know. And if I can get this slide to move on. The foundation of this approach is ecopedagogy. And I don't have time to talk about the whole of ecopedagogy because it's a massive, massive subject. But basically, it's responsibility, eco-awareness, and just basically, as Paulo Freire said, who was the founder of ecopedagogy, it's learning about the world by being in the world. So ecopedagogy is a development of Freire's critical pedagogy. Journaling is really important in ecopedagogy, and journaling is great because, again, this can't be searched for. Your journal entries can't be searched on the internet. They're not subject to software tools. And we try to challenge our students, but not in a physical way. So this is an all abilities kind of thing. I actually had somebody last year was having both of his knees reconstructed. He actually found it harder to get to the lecture room than he did to do the outdoor tasks that we're doing. So it's very much a kind of inclusive thing. It's not a kind of outward bound type of tasks that we're giving them. And I quite like to send them out into the city landscapes, which are tangled landscapes. So they're partly man-made, partly natural. And it's a good place to see the intersection between the planet, nature, and business, and what sort of decisions business leaders are making and the consequences. So there are assemblages of all kinds of interesting evidence for the students to look at. There's their own individual background. There's a sociocultural fabric of the area they're in. the task that we ask them to do. And of course, they bring their own technology with them into those campus field trips as well. So I'll just finish off then with some basic principles for assessment in the age of artificiality, which goes, further than just AI and large language models. And actually, there are some AIs like machine learning and things which have had, I believe, a lot more kind of genuine impact. But I like to think of students as mirrors of our own teaching practice. So when I'm marking an essay and I come across an essay which I feel is just somehow artificial or not getting to the real issues, I try to ask myself, what is it that I'm missing in my teaching? How am I not bringing them to that point of reflection? Because I think that fake learning kind of leads to fake assessment. And if we're encouraging students to, search for things on the internet and smash them together in a Google mosaic and put that in as what they believe to be the truth, then we're obviously letting them down as well. Journals are a source of evidence, and by that I mean they're journaling. I do use academic sources, but I usually start, so I have a level 1 principles of management course where my first assessment is based on journal entries, and then the second assessment brings in academic journals, because I want the students to get used to the idea of evidence before we throw loads of academic journals at them. The idea of using critical reflection and writing in the first person. And finally, I'll just say, please be careful about what you feed into generative AI platforms. If it's outside the Glasgow kind of firewall, it's definitely worth reading all those terms and conditions before you do any of that. And that concludes my talk, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Oh, I learned so much. The entire history about computers, of course, is amazing. No, yeah, fantastic. Very refreshing. Thank you so much for this. Yes, and we'll open the floor for questions. So you can ask questions on camera or in the chat, whatever you you prefer. It's absolutely up to you. So go ahead. I usually start with a question if there's no question in the chat. So is there a question in the chat?
There's 12 comments, so I haven't been looking at it. So, but
so yeah, I think there are mainly comments. But
okay, yeah, it is cold and foggy, that's for sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think my question about the assessment, I mean, it sounds like an assessment that students will really appreciate and like, because usually when you do something that's quite applied and so on, they are appreciative of it. Are there any challenges that you have encountered with those kind of assessments in your teaching?
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely challenges. It's definitely not easy. I think, first of all, I send students out onto the campus. So I'm sending them outdoors. So I have to think about that. Like, is that safe to do that? So, I mean, they've walked through the campus to get there, but, still you have to think about these things. That's the first thing. It's not trivial. Also, you have to plan those campus field trips quite a lot as well. Like I did send my students out on a 4th year course to do a campus field trip, and it was absolutely rubbish. And they just basically come back after 40 minutes feeling really dejected because I basically had given them a task that they couldn't really do because I hadn't planned it. So there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of prep, and I have made mistakes along the way. And then the other thing I think is just, I think actually it's interesting. Quite often, I think a lot of students do enjoy something different and they like to be challenged, but then some students don't. Like some students, they're here for the essay, they're here for the exam, they're here for the passive learning. That's what they expect, that's what they want, and they'll say so in the course evaluations if they're not happy with it. And I have had that feedback. So basically, it's not for everyone.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the moment you increase the degrees of freedom, then it becomes more difficult to kind of say, okay, this is one answer to that one question. Usually it's like, this is a repertoire of answers to that one question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah. Any other questions? Helena, sorry, you already are on camera, so I'm
No,
assuming
but
you
I
have a
don't really
question.
have a question. I just thought it was really interesting.
Oh.
I like talking about if nobody has questions, I can just chat. Well, I think one of the challenges at the moment that we're experiencing is actually our students are scared to use AI. And they've said that to me, and it's also evident in the way that they are declaring AI use. So we've gone in the school, we've gone for instead of saying you can't use it, it's a kind of blanket, well, it's okay as long as you are transparent about use. So, you know, that's a message that I think is getting out there. But what students are doing is they're saying they're frightened of using it because they're scared about being accused of plagiarism or copying from AI or misuse and things like that. And I think that this has surprised me. I have to say that this is a reaction that we're getting from people when actually what we're wanting are people to explore it and to challenge it.
Yeah, again, I think personally, I mean, I don't do this, but I have seen lots of colleagues who are using AI in a really sophisticated way. They're integrating it into their lectures, and they're providing scaffolding for those students to engage with it. I think by the same token, I had a class where the students have been told by, again, I'm sorry to kind of disagree publicly with all these professors, but they've been told that by a professor that they must not use AI under any circumstances. And I had to tell the students that that is actually contravention of the University of Glasgow policy, which says that they accept that they will and even encourages them to use AI. So I think, you know, on the one hand, you've probably got academics who are using AI in really smart ways and really bringing their students with them. And then other academics who are telling them, you know, you're going to get hit by a lightning bolt if you even go anywhere near this technology. And of course, they don't know what to. There's all that stuff in the University of Glasgow web pages that's absolutely crystal clear what they can use it for, how they can cite it, and all of this kind of stuff. But there's still a lot of fear for that reason, I think. Yeah, it's just really interesting. I don't know the answer to it, but
no, I don't have an answer either. It's just today I had a discussion with one of our class reps about this because she was kind of like, Helena, here's some feedback.
Yeah. I mean, what I'd say to students is that, you know, if they want to use AI, you know, there's nothing in the rules that says they can't. They just have to be responsible and ethical about the way they use it. There's a fantastic MOOC on Coursera about generative AI in education by a Glasgow team. It's really, really good, and there's lots of hints and tips there about how you can use AI. I've just kind of very deliberately taken this rather kind of I don't know, what's the word, provocative kind of stance, because I think that it's important that we look at it in both ways. But I'm not saying we shouldn't use it. You know, just think we should be careful.
Yeah. I think what we have kind of a traffic light system for AI as to provide them with guidance. And I think that's very useful because it comes with a blurb about what is acceptable to how to use it, and then examples as well for that is targeted and tailored to that specific assessment. So for this assessment, you can use it, for example, for these things. And for example, when students come to my student office hours, or also when they ask questions on Teams, they use the same kind of language now. They say, okay, this is what I have been using for this kind of thing. Is that okay? Right? Yeah. So you can see they are picking up on the nuances, which is exactly what we want, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's that mindful use of AI. Actually, I've just seen Kenneth on the call as well. So he was actually on that MOOC. That MOOC was brilliant.
Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant stuff.
Can we share a link to that MOOC? Do you have it handy? And put it in the chat, and then I can just share it alongside
Sarah, and I'm pretty sure we can all access it for free.
Yeah.
Through the SSO. It's great, actually. And it must be about a year or so now.
Yeah, it is a year. Yeah, it's just come up for a year.
I think it's still relevant. Like, that's the thing about, like, people say AI is changing, but it isn't really. AI hasn't really changed, and I think that's the thing, that everybody was expecting it to just take off, and it just hasn't really.
Yeah,
It's kind of much the same.
I know he's frantically typing. I made this. Thank you.
Yes.
Great. Yay. Thank you so much. So I'm going to put this as one of the resources when I do the post for the specific talk alongside.
Oh yeah, I think that's a really good idea, because it's a cracking course, and it's not, it's not overwhelmingly challenging. You can get it done. I think it's like 4 weeks if you put in a few hours a week. Yeah.
That's fine. We have a raised hand. Do you want to ask your question on camera? Hello.
Hi. How are you doing, Matt?
Good.
Hey, nice to see you, Vijay. How are you?
I'm doing good. I was thinking, like, I really did enjoy the way you were teaching last year, and I really enjoyed the field trip. But when I spoke to a lot of people, or what I observed from other people was that a lot of people found it very difficult because there was no structure to it, right? It was jazzy.
Yeah. That's right, and we got that a lot in the evaluation, and it's something that I took forward. We've got 300 students on that course, so I'm actually doing a Lowland Leader course at the moment, so I'm going to be qualified to take students out, and it will be much more structured. But I can't do that for 300 students, so that's a big problem. So effectively, what that campus field trip has become is a bit of a leg stretch in the middle of the lecture, where students can go and do a thing. But I still think it needs to be more structured, and that's a lesson that I learned from that, and we actually got that in the course evaluation as well.
So my question is, like, if it is all about like letting people develop the ability to reflect, right? Reflecting and thinking critically, why can you not do that with AI? Like, my flatmate sit and talk to AI, and the AI is his counselor. And when you look at the response it gives, there is a certain sort of artificiality, but it asks a question. So for a guy who doesn't have the money to go and talk to a real therapist, AI is doing a good enough job. So can a person who's not in a place where he can interact with, like, all these things, like there's not enough hand holding or scaffolding, can he not interact with AI to act like a person who you can chat, and maybe that can help with him thinking reflectively, like it's not giving you answers?
Yeah, I mean, what I tried to say in there is, as I said, there are lots of colleagues who are using AI as as scaffolding for critical evaluation, and I think that does work, but you have to be very deliberate about how you use AI. So there's lots of really good examples of that. So just because I don't use them myself doesn't mean that I don't think they should be used. I think that if you just use, again, a bit like the campus filter, if you use it without the scaffolding and without the structure, then you don't know that people using it are going to use it for reflective learning. They might just take the answer. I mean, you gave the example there of providing therapy or counseling. That's quite a high stakes kind of thing that trusting. I'm not sure I would want to trust AI with my mental health. So I think there's some ethical kind of issues there. But on the other hand, if you can't get access to anything else, but I mean, I don't really want to kind of get drawn into that too much, but I suppose my point is that you can use AI in a deliberate and smart way, a bit like some of the methods they mention on the MOOC, then that's fine. But just a free-for-all accessing AI is going to have very, very variable results, and also it is a dangerous place to go as well in some cases. There's lots of software that sits on platforms on the web that people just go and use. I found an app that can do this, or I've downloaded this onto my phone, and we very rarely look at what's happening to our data when we do that. I come from the military. I come from an information security background, and I'm very, very jealous about my data. I don't use I don't use Google at all. I use Firefox. I use all the trackers. You know, I try to share as little data. I can't share no data, but I try to share as little data as I can. So I'm really skeptical about it. I'm probably an extreme case, I expect.
Thank you.
I would like, yeah, thank you for the question as well. I would just like to point or highlight one of the comments by Kate, who comes from the corporate world in consulting in the US, and she writes, the early career analysts who are most willing to explore, test, try out new tools are the ones who advance most quickly. They become the early adopters who add value by bringing new ideas. So I hope students don't learn to feel afraid to experiment. So it's quite nice. Thank you, Kate, for sharing.
Yeah, I agree. No, you shouldn't be afraid. Absolutely, yeah.
All right. So I think, is there any other question? I don't want to cut anyone short. So
I have one quick question.
Yeah.
So this is about actually the idea about assessment, right? If we are thinking about assessing people about their critical thinking and what they have to say or how they can evaluate, right? The way we are assessing now, are we not assessing them on their language ability? Like I have seen people in my class who I think have interesting things to say, but they are typing in Mandarin and then they are copy pasting that to change to English to then submit as an essay. A lot of that is lost in translation. And if they are getting marked down because their English sounds artificial or it doesn't go, we are now actually marking them for their ideas, right? Or their point of view, or rather for their language. In that case, if they're using AI, would that not be like leveling the playing field?
Well, I think for me personally, and I know different people have different views on this, but my view would be that the assessment is wrong in that case. You know, because obviously there's a whole load of stuff to unpack here. I mean, there's the whole like the entry requirements, the proficiency in the language that is expected at certain points. But if students feel like they are, like as I said, I'm not stopping anyone or suggesting that somebody stops from using AI. I'm just suggesting people are cautious about it. But if a student feels like they have to use AI and perhaps they have reservations about it, then why are we forcing them into that corner by there's a question here: are we assessing language skills or are we assessing critical thinking? And that's not really an AI question. That's an assessment question, I would suggest. So, and it's a very big one, way above my pay grade. But what I try to do is I try not to use essays where I can, and I'm actively trying to reduce them wherever I can. Because I do feel there is a sort of a language ability problem. I mean, don't get me wrong, we also have to be able to, students have to be good at communication. And the language of the university and higher education is English. So, we have to bear that in mind as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for the questions. And again, thank you, Matt, for your presentation and answering all the questions and the discussion. As always, I will upload everything on our Tile Network website, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at our next Tile Network talk in February. All right. Thank you and bye.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you for the opportunity and lovely to meet you all.